Hello and welcome to the Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse. I'm Alex Rowe, director of the Playhouse, and we are proud to present the world premiere of this documented drama by Joseph Ryan, Love Letters from the Cold War. This new work is drawn from memoirs, addresses, and chiefly letters between John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev from 1960 to 1963. 2022 is the 60th anniversary year of the temporary installation of Soviet tactical missiles on the island of Cuba. The year in the 20th century we came closest, perhaps, to the start of a nuclear war. How I wish we could see that time as a distant memory of a fraught era all but forgotten to us now, but it is not so. All the more, then, are we pleased to present this production that shows two world leaders deeply opposed to one another's world views and in command of fearsome arsenals, seeking to understand one another with a common goal, to keep from destroying that world. Their words are poignant and surprising today, and we cannot hear them without remembering how far we have come and have not. And consider this our holiday gift to you and yours, a gift of hope and understanding, with our continued wish that you stay safe, stay well, and love one another. Happy holidays from Metropolitan Virtual Playhouse.
Mr. Kennedy, allow me to congratulate you on the occasion of your election to the high post of the President of the United States. We hope that while you are at this post, the relations between our countries would meet the basic interests not only of the peoples of the USSR and the United States, but all mankind, which is longing for deliverance from the threat of a new war.
I am most appreciative of your courtesy in sending me a message of congratulations. The achievement of a just and lasting peace will remain a fundamental goal of this nation and a major task of its president.
In your speech of inauguration, you, Mr. President, said that you would like for the Soviet Union and the United States of America to unite their efforts in such areas as the struggle against disease, mastering the cosmos, development of culture and trade. We welcome these utterances of yours. We would consider that favorable conditions for the most speedy solution of these noble tasks would be created through the settlement of the problem of disarmament. If we reach such an agreement, it would be a great joy for all people on earth and a great blessing for all mankind.
I think we should recognize that there are problems on which we may not be able to agree. I do believe that the manner in which we approach them, the manner in which our disagreements are handled, can be of great importance. I hope it will be possible for us to meet personally for an informal exchange of views. You may be sure, Mr. Chairman, that I intend to do everything I can toward developing a more harmonious relationship between our two countries. The people of the United States share with the people of the Soviet Union their satisfaction for the safe flight of the astronaut in man's first venture into space. We congratulate you and the Soviet scientists and engineers who made this feat possible. It is my sincere desire that in the continuing quest for knowledge of outer space, our nations can work together to obtain the greatest benefit to mankind.
Mr. President, I send you this message in an hour of alarm fraught with danger for the peace of the whole world. Armed aggression has begun against Cuba. It is a secret to no one that the armed bands invading this country were trained, equipped, and armed in the United States of America. The bombs they are dropping are being supplied by the American government. All of this evokes here an understandable feeling of indignation on the part of the Soviet government and the Soviet people. Your statement a few days ago that the USA would not participate in military activities against Cuba created the impression that the top leaders of the United States were taking into account the consequences for general peace and for the USA itself, which aggression against Cuba could have. And any so-called little war can touch off a chain reaction in all parts of the globe.
Mr. Chairman, you are under a serious misapprehension in regard to the events in Cuba. I repeat now that the United States intends no military intervention in Cuba. In the event of any military intervention by outside force, we will immediately honor our obligations under the inter-American system to protect this hemisphere against external aggression.
Despite all assurances to the contrary, it has now been proved beyond doubt that it was precisely the United States which prepared the intervention, financed its arming, and transported the gangs of mercenaries that invaded the territory of Cuba. United States armed forces also took a direct part in the accomplishment of the gangster attack upon Cuba. On behalf of the people of the Soviet Union and on my own behalf, I send you and all the American people sincere congratulations on the occasion of the successful launching of a rocket with a man on board that flew a distance of 300 miles and that during flight reached a height of up to 115 miles. Please convey my heartfelt congratulations to the pilot, Shepard.
The American people and I sincerely thank you for your message conveying congratulations on behalf of yourself and the Soviet people on the occasion of the flight of Commander Shepard in the first American manned exploration of space. We believe that the peaceful exploration of space is a venture undertaken on behalf of mankind as a whole. In that spirit, each new step in the conquest and understanding of space, wherever made, will be an achievement in which all of us share.
I accept your proposal for a meeting. The time and space of the meeting which you have proposed, namely June 3rd to 4th, in Vienna, are acceptable to me. At the reception, Kennedy introduced me to his wife and mother. His mother made a good impression on me, a pleasant woman. As to his wife, Jacqueline, The journalists always described her as a striking beauty who enchanted men with her loveliness, but she made no such impression on me. She was quick of tongue, or as the Ukrainians say, she had a sharp tongue in her head, and she was a resourceful conversationalist. Don't mix it up with her, she'll cut you down to size. As head of the Soviet delegation, it was of no concern to me what she was like. One last meeting with Kennedy took place at the reception or at the theater. Kennedy was very gloomy, like a sad-eyed puppy. He was not just preoccupied, but actually very glum. I wanted us to part on a more cheerful note, but there was nothing I could do to help him. Politics is implacable, and our differing class positions did not allow us to come to an agreement, regardless of any efforts on my part. As a politician, I understood this, but as a human being, I sympathized with Kennedy. He was disappointed, and his internal enemies in the United States would gain satisfaction. They would say you wanted to discuss with them the language of agreements, but instead you got a punch in the nose, and you returned home discredited.
Dear Mr. Chairman, many thanks for your kindness in presenting me with a case of beverages during our recent meeting in Vienna. I would also like to express my appreciation to the Soviet government for the gold cigar case, caviar, and records. For these courtesies, I am very grateful.
It is also a pleasure for Nina Petrovna and myself to fulfill Mrs. Kennedy's wish to send to your family little Pushinka, a direct offspring of the well-known cosmos traveler Strelka, which made a trip on a cosmic ship on August 19th, 1960. I express my hope that Pushinka will be a pleasure to you and will serve as a good remembrance of our meetings and conversations in Vienna.
Mrs. Kennedy and I were particularly pleased to receive Pushinka. Jackie, why did the chairman send us a Space Dogs pupnik?
The state dinner, Jack. I was running out of things to say. He kept talking something about hunting a Russian bear, so I mentioned hearing about their Space Dogs puppies. I asked if he thought a communist puppy would become a capitalist if it was raised in America. He said we could find out. If I knew he was going to send you vodka and a golden humidor, I would have asked Khrushchev for a Titian from the Winter Palace.
I never met a man like that. I talked about how a nuclear war would kill 70 million people in 10 minutes, and he just looked at me. Annihilation. No qualms at all. He beat me up. He kept lecturing me about the benefits of communism. It was like dealing with Dad, all give and no take. He threatened to cut off West Berlin, for Christ's sake. Our presence in West Berlin and our access cannot be ended by any act of the Soviet government. We have given our word that an attack upon that city will be regarded as an attack upon us all. We cannot and will not permit the communists to drive us out of Berlin, either gradually or by force. We have another sober responsibility: to recognize the possibilities of nuclear war in the missile age. Tomorrow, I am requesting of the Congress new funds for the following immediate objectives: to identify and mark space in existing structures, public and private, that could be used for fallout shelters in case of attack, to stock those shelters with food, water, first aid kits, and other minimum essentials for survival. The world is not deceived by the communist attempt to label Berlin as a hotbed of war. There is peace in Berlin today. The source of world trouble and tension is Moscow, not Berlin. And if war begins, it will have begun in Moscow and not Berlin.
A wall to separate East Berlin from West Berlin. We worked out our tactics. I was the one that proposed them. We were sure the West had no reason to carry out matters to the point of all-out war. We had outgrown our short pants. Dear Mr. President, I am on the shore of the Black Sea. This is indeed a wonderful place. As a former naval officer, you would surely appreciate the merits of these surroundings, the beauty of the sea, and the grandeur of the Caucasian mountains. Under this bright southern sun, it is even somehow hard to believe that there still exist problems in the world which, due to lack of solutions, cast a sinister shadow on peaceful life, on the future of millions of people.
Dear Mr. Chairman, I regret that the press of events has made it impossible for me to reply earlier to your very important letter of last month. I have brought your 26-page letter here with me to Cape Cod for a weekend in which I can devote all the time necessary to give it the answer it deserves. My family has come to a home here overlooking the Atlantic for many years. My father and brothers own homes near my own, and my children always have a large group of cousins for company. So this is an ideal place for me to spend my weekends during the summer and fall, to relax, to think, to devote my time to major tasks instead of constant appointments, telephone calls, and details. I know how you must feel about your spot on the Black Sea, for I value my own opportunities to get a clearer and quieter perspective away from the din of Washington.
I have given much thought of late to the international events since our meeting in Vienna. The whole world expected that our meetings would turn relations between our countries into the correct channel and promote the adoption of decisions which would give the people's confidence that at last peace on earth will be secured. To my regret, and I believe to yours, this did not happen. In Vienna, I remember you emphasized that you did not want to proceed towards war and favored living in peace with our country while competing in peaceful activities, and the subsequent events did not proceed in the way that could be desired.
Subsequent event?
I thought it might be useful in a purely informal and personal way to approach you and share some of my ideas. If you do not agree with me, you can consider that this letter did not exist, while I, for my part, will not use this correspondence in my public statements. Only in confidential correspondence can you say what you think without a backward glance at the press.
I am gratified by your decision to suggest this additional means of communication. Certainly you are correct in emphasizing that this correspondence must be kept wholly private, much less disclosed to the press. For my part, the contents and even the existence of our letters will be known only to the Secretary of State and a few others of my closest associates. Neither of us is going to convert the other to a new social, economic, or political point of view. So these letters can be free from the polemics of the Cold War debate.
How necessary it is for men who are vested with great power to be inspired with the understanding that we live on one planet. There is an analogy here. I like this comparison with Noah's Ark, where both the clean and the unclean found sanctuary. But regardless of who lists himself with the clean and who is considered to be unclean, they are equally interested in one thing, and that is that the Ark should successfully continue its cruise. We have no other alternative. Either we should live in peace and cooperation so that the Ark maintains its buoyancy, or else it sinks.
I like very much your analogy with both the clean and the unclean, determined that it stay afloat. Whatever our differences, our collaboration to keep the peace is as urgent, if not more urgent, than our collaboration to win the last World War.
I was given the text of your address before the United Nations General Assembly. You speak of communism with disrespect, but I could reply in kind with regard to capitalism. But can we change each other's mind in question affecting our outlooks? No. I was about to write you a letter right then. However, your television address in July unfortunately made it impossible for me to send that letter. After that speech, which was belligerent in its nature, my letter would not have been understood by you since it completely differed in spirit, content, and tone from what you said.
I would hope that upon re-examination, you will find my television address was more balanced than belligerent. I made it clear that We intended to defend our vital interests in Berlin. My speech also made it clear that we would prefer and encourage a peaceful solution, one which settled these problems on a mutually acceptable basis.
I started out by describing the delights of the Black Sea coast, but then I turned to politics. They say that you sometimes throw politics out the door, but it climbs back through the window. I have given careful thought to what you told our journalists and to the difficulties to which you referred. I fully understand that the questions which have now matured and require solution are not the kind that lend themselves to solution. But they have a vitally important significance for our countries and for all the countries of the world. Therefore, we cannot escape them. In 1945, the four powers pledged to do their utmost in order that Germany would never be able to threaten its neighbors and the world peace. But now, West Germany, with your assistance, has acquired such strength that it is openly encroaching on the territories of neighboring countries and starting to grasp its NATO allies by arms and feet.
You are right in stating that we should all realistically face the facts in the Berlin and German situations. And one of those facts is the peace which exists in Germany now. It is not the remains of World War II, but the threat of World War III that preoccupies us all.
These are the major questions because on their solution depends the course which relations between our countries take, or whether they will proceed in a different direction, a dangerous one for mankind. Please convey my best wishes to your wife. I wish you and your entire family good health.
While we are consulting on these matters with our respective allies, and you are meeting with your party Congress, I hope these efforts can continue. Let's also both strive now to avoid any statement, incident, or other provocation in Berlin which make a negotiating climate impossible. My wife, who is here with me, reciprocates your good wishes, and we return the wish of good health to you and all your family.
I have read your letter of October 16 with great attention. It is good that you had an opportunity to write in a quiet atmosphere in your family circle, far from the turmoil of the capital.
I am conscious of the difficulties you and I face in establishing full communication between our two minds. Therefore, I am trying to penetrate our ideological differences in order to find some bridge across the gulf on which we could bring our minds together and find some way in which to protect the peace of the world.
On a mutually acceptable basis.
Which will preserve for years to come the peace we now enjoy. As the year of 1961 approaches its close, I wish to extend to the people of the Soviet Union and to you and your families my most sincere wishes and those of the American people for a peaceful and prosperous new year. The year has been a troubled one. It is my earnest hope that the coming year will strengthen the foundations of world peace and will bring an improvement in the relations between our countries.
The more quickly distances between states are overcome and the more terrible weapons of annihilation become, the more the responsibility of state leaders increases and the more the wisdom is required for resolving international problems and others. This is doubly true in respect to disarmament.
I was gratified to see that you have been thinking along the same lines as to the importance of the new disarmament negotiations, which will begin in Geneva in March. I was gratified also that you agreed to the heads of government should assume personal responsibility for the success of these negotiations.
I congratulate you and the American people on the occasion of the successful launching of a spaceship with a man on board. One more step has been taken towards mastering the cosmos, and this time Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, a citizen of the United States of America, has been added to the family of astronauts. If our countries pooled their efforts to master the universe, this would be very beneficial for the advance of science and would be joyfully acclaimed by all peoples who would like to see scientific achievements benefit man and not be used for Cold War purposes and the arms race.
I have long held this same belief, and indeed put it forward strongly in my first State of the Union message.
I have familiarized myself with your statement that you had decided that the United States would conduct, beginning in April of this year, a series of nuclear tests in the atmosphere. That is what you call in your message a reasonable policy? Quite recently, you and the entire Western press argued, and argued correctly, how harmful such tests are. How much was said at that time about the fact that nuclear tests contaminate the air, soil, and vegetation, that radioactive fallout, together with their contaminated plants, reaches the organisms of animals and particularly cows, and that such fallout is transmitted through milk consumed by children? But now it turns out that all of these arguments were directed only against the Soviet Union and were used merely for the purpose of enabling the United States to preserve its superiority in certain types of armaments. It appears that all the talk about humanitarianism and love for one fellow man ceases immediately as soon as the question of monopolies, profits arises.
Our object now must be to make real progress toward disarmament, and not to engage in sterile exchanges of propaganda.
On the occasion of the national holiday of the USA, Independence Day, we send you and the entire American people sincere congratulations and best wishes from the people of the Soviet Union and from ourselves. We should like to believe that the time is beginning when, congratulating one another on national holidays, we will also be able to point to the results of mutual efforts for successes in the matters of removing the threat of war and for securing peace on earth.
I send to you and to the Soviet people the heartiest congratulations of the people and government of the United States in the outstanding joint flights of Major Nikolaev and Colonel Popovich.
Let us immediately sign an agreement on the cessation of nuclear tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. We think that an agreement on such basis would, nevertheless, be a major step forward.
We should make a serious effort to work out such an agreement to meet the target date of January 1, 1963. There has been a great deal of talk on the situation in Cuba in recent days, both in the communist camp and in our own, and I would like to take this opportunity to set the matter in perspective. Ever since communism moved into Cuba in 1958, Soviet technical and military personnel have moved steadily onto the island in increasing numbers at the invitation of the Cuban government. Now that movement has been increased. It is under our most careful surveillance, but I will repeat the conclusion that I reported last week, that these new shipments do not constitute a serious threat to any other part of this hemisphere. If at any time the communist buildup in Cuba were to endanger or interfere with our security in any way, including the lives of American citizens in this country, or if Cuba should ever attempt to export its aggressive purposes by force, or the threat of force against any nation in this hemisphere, then this country will do whatever must be done to protect its own security and that of its allies. As President and Commander-in-Chief, I have full authority now to take such action, and I have asked the Congress to authorize me to call up reserve forces should this or any other crisis make it necessary.
I never expected you would take a decision to request from the Congress an authority to call up 150,000 reservists. I must tell you straightforwardly, Mr. President, that your statement with threats against Cuba is just as inconceivable as that. Under present circumstances, when there exist thermonuclear weapons, your request to the Congress is not only a step making the atmosphere red hot, it is already a dangerous sign that you want to pour oil in the flame by mobilizing new military contingents. That naturally forces the other side to respond in kind. Your planes even now go on buzzing our ships. If such arbitrariness is not stopped, you yourself realize what it can lead to.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. The characteristics of these new missile sites indicates two types of installations. Several of them include medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for a distance of more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area. This sudden, clandestine decision to station strategic weapons for the first time outside of Soviet soil is a deliberately provocative and unjustified change in the status quo, which cannot be accepted by this country. Acting in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. My fellow citizens, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can see precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. One path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom. God willing, that goal will be achieved. Thank you, and good night.
I have just received your letter and have also acquainted myself with the text of your speech of October 22. I should say, frankly, that measures outlined in your statement represent a serious threat to peace and security of peoples. The United States has taken a path of gross violation of Charter of the United Nations, path of violation of freedom of navigation of high seas, path of aggressive action, both against Cuba and against Soviet Union. We also cannot recognize the right of the United States to establish control over armaments essential to the Republic of Cuba for strengthening of its defensive capacity. We confirm that armaments now on Cuba are destined exclusively for defensive purposes. I hope that the government of the United States will show prudence and renounce actions which could lead to catastrophic consequences for peace throughout the world.
I think you will recognize the step which started the chain of events was the action of your government in secretly furnishing offensive weapons to Cuba. I am concerned that we both show prudence and do nothing to allow events to make the situation more difficult to control than it already is. I hope that you will issue immediately the necessary instructions to your ships to observe the terms of the quarantine, which will go into effect at 1400 hours Greenwich time, October 24. Sincerely, JFK.
Just imagine, Mr. President, that we had presented you with the conditions of an ultimatum which you have presented us by your action. How would you have reacted to this? I think that you would have been indignant at such a step on our part. You, Mr. President, have flung a challenge at us. You, Mr. President, are not declaring quarantine, but rather are setting forth an ultimatum and threatening that if we do not give in to your demands, you will use force. Consider what you are saying. You are no longer appealing to reason, but wish to intimidate us.
I regret very much that you still do not appear to understand what it is that has moved us in this matter. In August, there were reports of important shipments of military equipment and technicians from the Soviet Union to Cuba. In early September, I indicated very plainly that the United States would regard any shipment of offensive weapons as presenting the gravest issues. After that time, this government received the most explicit assurances from your government, both publicly and privately, that no offensive weapons were being sent to Cuba. I learned beyond doubt what you have not denied, namely, that all these public assurances were false and that your military people had set out recently to establish a set of missile bases in Cuba. I repeat my regret that these events should cause a deterioration in our relations. I hope that your government will take the necessary action to permit a restoration of the earlier situation.
Everyone needs peace. Both capitalists, if they have not lost their reason, and still more, communists, people who know how to value not only their own lives, more than anything, the lives of the people. What would a war give you? We must not succumb to intoxication and petty passions. Mr. President, let us show good sense. I assure you that on those ships which are bound for Cuba, there are no weapons at all. The weapons necessary for the defense of Cuba are already there. I do not wish to say that there were not any shipments of weapons at all. No, there were such shipments. But now Cuba has already received the necessary means of defense. Let us normalize relations.
I have read your letter of October 26th and welcome the statement of your desire to seek a prompt solution to the problem. The first thing that needs to be done, however, is for work to cease on offensive missile bases in Cuba, and for all weapon systems in Cuba capable of offensive use to be rendered inoperable.
You wish to ensure the security of your country, and this is understandable. But Cuba, too, wants the same thing. But how are we to assess your actions in the fact that you have surrounded the Soviet Union with military bases, surrounded our allies with military bases, placed military bases literally around our country, and stationed your missile armaments there? Turkey adjoins us. Our sentries see each other. Do you consider that you have the right to demand security for your own country and the removal of the weapons you call offensive, but do not accord the same right to us? You have placed destructive missiles, weapons, which you call offensive in Turkey. I therefore make this proposal. We are willing to remove from Cuba the means which you regard as offensive. Your representatives will make a declaration to the effect that the United States will remove its analogous means from Turkey. If you are agreeable to my proposal, Mr. President, then we would send our representatives to the United Nations and would give them instructions in order that an agreement may be reached more quickly. Because the whole world is now apprehensive and expects sensible actions of us. I thank you for the sense of proportion you have displayed and for realization of the responsibility which now devolves on you for the preservation of the peace of the world. The Soviet has given a new order to dismantle the arms, which you describe as offensive, to create and return them to the Soviet Union. I regard with respect and trust the statement you made in your message of October 27, that there would be no attack, no invasion of Cuba, and not only on the part of the United States, but also on the part of other nations of the Western Hemisphere. Thus, there is every condition for eliminating the present conflict.
Dear Mr. Chairman, I think that you and I, with our heavy responsibilities for the maintenance of peace, were aware that developments were approaching a point where events could have become unmanageable. So I welcome this message and consider it an important contribution to peace.
Dear Mr. President, Ambassador Dobrinin has apprised me of his conversation with Robert Kennedy on October 27. Robert Kennedy said that it is difficult for you at the present time to publicly discuss the question of eliminating the U.S. missile bases in Turkey because stationing of those bases in Turkey was formalized through a NATO Council decision. I do understand the delicacy involved for you in an open consideration of the issue of eliminating the U.S. missile bases in Turkey. I agree that our discussion of this subject be pursued confidentially through Robert Kennedy and the Soviet ambassador in Washington. Now, our main difficulties lie precisely in the fact that we have removed from Cuba missiles and warheads. That is, we have fulfilled our commitments while the US is not carrying out its commitments. The quarantine continues, the US planes continue to fly over Cuba, and there is no agreement that would register the pledges of the US. All this finds ears that are listening and listening attentively. It is difficult for us to give explanations to such unjustifiable state of affairs.
I cannot agree with your statement that you have fulfilled your commitments and we have not fulfilled ours. Major parts of the undertakings on your side, the arrangements for verification and safeguards against introduction, have not yet been carried out. In these circumstances, we have so far been patient and careful, as we have been indeed at every stage.
The US government was afforded the possibility to ascertain the fact that all 42 missiles that were in Cuba have really been removed. Lately, I have to hear more and more often that we are too trustful with regard to the statements of the US readiness to carry out its part on the agreement on Cuba, and the American side will, under various pretexts, evade the fulfillment of the obligations which it assumed. I do not want to believe this, and I proceed from something different. The president has given his word, and he will keep it as well as we keep our word. I heard that Americans have a rule. In any business, each side should approach with the same standard the fulfillment of both its own obligations and the obligation of its counterpart, and not use double standard, one for itself and another for the others. This is a good rule. Let us follow this good American rule.
I was able to announce the lifting of our quarantine promptly at my press conference on the basis of your welcome assurance that Soviet bombers will be removed within a month.
I trust the statement made in your message, too, that the United States confirms its commitment not to invade Cuba. It would seem that you and we have come now to a final stage in the elimination of tensions around Cuba. Our relations are already entering now their normal course. That is good.
I was glad to know that you believe, as we do, that we have come to the final stage of the Cuban affair between us.
The year of 1962 witnessed events, the fatal development of which it was possible to avert, thanks to the fact that the sides showed a sensible approach and reached a compromise. May the new year be a year of a turn for the better in relations between our countries. N. Khrushchev.
On behalf of the American people and myself, I extend best wishes for the new year to the Soviet people and to you and your families. The American people look forward to the coming year with the deepest desire that the cause of peace be advanced.
Mr. President, that time has now come to put an end once and for all to the nuclear tests. Both of us stand on the same position with regard to the fact that national means of detection are sufficient to control banning experimental nuclear explosions in outer space, in the atmosphere, and underwater. You, Mr. President, and your representatives point out that without at least a minimum number of on-site inspections, you will not manage to persuade the US Senate to ratify an agreement on the cessation of tests. This circumstance ties you and does not allow you to sign a treaty. If this is the only difficulty on the way to an agreement, then for the noble and humane goal of ceasing nuclear weapons tests, we are ready to compromise.
Dear Mr. Chairman, I think it may be helpful to have some exchange of views in this private channel. It's of great importance that we should try to understand each other clearly. On the negotiations for a nuclear test ban, I fear that there may have been an honest misunderstanding between us. You and your representatives have made clear your belief that on our side there had been some indication last year of a readiness to accept the number of inspections which you proposed. I know that the United States government never adopted any such position, but I have respect for your representatives too, so I believe there was an honest misunderstanding on that point. A closely connected question is the spread of nuclear weapons. And on this question, the American position remains as it has been. We are strongly against other nations developing nuclear capabilities. Let me say clearly that you can rely upon our continued and determined opposition to the spread of nuclear forces. I want again to send my warm personal wishes to you and all your family. Both you and I have grave responsibilities to our families and to all mankind. The pressures from those who have a less patient and peaceful outlook are very great, but I assure you of my own determination to work at all times to strengthen world peace.
I note with satisfaction that in your message you confirm that the USA is decisively against other nations developing nuclear capabilities.
I appreciate the frankness with which you discussed some of the issues between us, even though I can find little encouragement from the gaps which separate us on these problems. I am more than ever of the opinion that a visit to Moscow by a personal representative would be useful, and I have asked the Secretary of State to undertake this task.
We will be glad to see Mr. Rusk here and to have a frank exchange of opinion with him on questions of interest for both sides. Let us hope that the trip by Secretary of State Dean Rusk will turn out to be both useful and fruitful.
It is with great pride that I participate in this ceremony of the American University. I have chosen this time and this place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds, and the truth is too rarely perceived, yet it is the most important topic on earth: world peace. I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age when great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. Some say that it is useless to speak of world peace or world disarmament until the leaders of the Soviet Union adopt a more enlightened attitude. I hope they do. I believe we can help them do it. But I also believe we must re-examine our own attitude. Let us re-examine our attitude toward the Soviet Union. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture and in acts of courage. No nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union suffered in the course of the Second World War. Let us re-examine our attitude toward the Cold War. We must deal with the world as it is, and not as it might have been had the history of the last 18 years been different. We can seek a relaxation of tension without relaxing our guard. I am announcing two important decisions in this regard. First, Chairman Khrushchev, Prime Minister Macmillan, and I have agreed that high-level discussions will shortly begin in Moscow, looking toward agreement on a comprehensive test ban treaty. Second, I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so. We will not be the first to resume. Such a declaration is no substitute for a formal binding treaty, but I hope it will help us achieve one. Nor would such a treaty be a substitute for disarmament, but I hope it will help us achieve it. Now, for the first time in many years, the path of peace may be open. No one can be certain what the future will bring, but history and our own conscience will judge us harsher if we do not now make every effort to test our hopes by action. And this is the place to begin. Dear Mr. Chairman, I send you many thanks for your generous message of sympathy on the death of our son, Patrick. Your message was a comfort to us. Mrs. Kennedy and I are very grateful to you. Sincerely, John Kennedy.
Dear Mr. President, today in the three capitals, Moscow, Washington, and London, the nuclear weapon test ban treaty has come into force. This undoubtedly is a significant development in international affairs, which brings joy to all peoples. The conclusion of the test ban treaty has injected a fresh spirit into the international atmosphere, showing that no matter how complicated contemporary problems, we can find mutually acceptable solutions in the interest of all mankind, in the interest of maintaining peace if we manifest the necessary push. Stremlenie. I thank you for the sense of proportion you have displayed and for realization of the responsibility which now devolves on you for the preservation of the peace of the world.
Dear Mr. Chairman President, I would like to thank you for sending Mr. Mikoyan as your representative to my husband's funeral. He looked so upset when he came through the line, and I was very moved. I tried to give him a message for you that day, but as it was such a terrible day for me, I do not know if my words came out as I meant them to. So now, in one of the last nights I will spend in the White House, in one of the last letters I will write on this paper at the White House, I would like to write you my message. I send it only because I know how much my husband cared about peace and how much the relation between you and him was central to this care in his mind. He used to quote your words in some of his speeches. In the next war, the survivors will envy the dead. You and he were adversaries, but you were allied in a determination that the world should not be blown up. You respected each other and could deal with each other.
I shall always keep the memory of my meetings with him.
The danger which troubled my husband was that war might be started not so much by the big men as by the little ones. While big men know the needs for self-control and restraint, little men are sometimes moved more by fear and pride. If only in the future the big men can continue to make the little ones sit down and talk before they start to fight. I send this letter because I know so deeply of the importance of the relationship which existed between you and my husband, and also because of your kindness and that of Mrs. Khrushchev in Vienna. I read that she had tears in her eyes when she left the American embassy in Moscow after signing the Book of Mourning. Please thank her for that.
Once upon a time, a peasant boasted that he would go to the forest and catch a bear. He was warned that it was a dangerous undertaking, that a bear is a strong beast. "Don't worry, I'll handle him," said the peasant, and went into the forest. Some time has passed, but the peasant still has not come back. The people started looking for him. "Where are you?" they cried. The peasant shouted back, "I am here, I've caught a bear." "Well, bring him here." "The bear won't come." "Then get out of there." "He won't let me." "He won't let me."